Hello and welcome to this special extended edition of the Craftsmen Online Reading Room. I'm your host, Brother Jason Short, and in this episode, we'll be taking an in-depth look into a reading selection by our most beloved illustrious brother, Clifford Jacobs. The Fama Fraternitatis, as translated into English and presented in the 2016 book, The Rosicrucian Trilogy, by Jocelyn Goodwin, Christopher McIntosh, and Donata McIntosh. Originally published in Kassel, Germany in 1614, with manuscripts in circulation as early as 1610, the authorship of this document remains a mystery. Some sources say the Fama, along with the other two original Rosicrucian texts, the Confessio Fraternitatis and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosencrantz, were penned by a young Johannes Valentinus Andrea as a sophomoric prank in jest of other Enlightenment texts of the day, while others maintain the manifestos were the product of a collaboration of like-minded individuals schooled in Hermeticism, alchemy, Christian mysticism, and the enlightening utopian ideas of the Renaissance and Reformation. Still, the Fama would go on to lay the foundation to one of the most prolific spiritual and philosophical mystical societies, the Rosicrucians. Joining me in today's conversation is our special guest, Brother Cliff. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Clifford Jacobs, a Freemason, of course. I first joined the craft back in 1988. I had always been interested in Freemasonry. I spent 4 years reading about it before I made the decision to join. And the thing that happened for me, I have to refer to Joseph Campbell. A lot of times, the hero's adventure begins with the death of the father. So my dad died in 1984. He was not a Freemason or a member of any fraternal order, but he was the neighborhood scoutmaster for well over 20 years. And I found an interview that he did on the radio, and he talked about scouting and how much it meant to him. And he thought it was the most democratic institution and was good for young men. And all the young men in my neighborhood knew my dad because he was the scoutmaster. So I wanted something like that for myself, but I didn't want to be a scoutmaster. So I spent 4 years reading about Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, the Knights Templar, when I decided that I would take the plunge and join. I was living in Queens, but I moved to East Elmhurst. And literally, I opened the yellow pages to see where was the closest lodge. And it turned out that it was in Flushing, the same neighborhood where I worked. I went, knocked on the door, and asked to be a member. And since then, I've been very active. After being a Mason for 2 years, I joined the Scottish Rite. That had a particular appeal to me, perhaps because of the system of 33 degrees. And I was raised Roman Catholic, so I knew the story about Christ dying when he was 33 years old. Eventually, I received the 33rd degree, and I love the Scottish Rite, and I spend most of my time there. I am a York Rite Mason. I belong to the Royal Lodge, Cryptic, Knights Templar, and a few invitational bodies that spring off of the York Rite line. But Freemasonry has just been a wonderful thing for me altogether. And I tell folks, I jokingly, I say, well, I might switch political parties, I might, move to a new location, but I'm gonna be a Mason forever. As it said in the film, The Man Who Would Be King, Christopher Plummer, as Rudyard Kipling says, once a Mason, always a Mason.
And now, let's meet our guest readers.
My name is Mike Sternfeld. I've been a Mason since 2008, Master Mason since 2009, past Master of my Mother Lodge. I'm a past Assistant Grand Lecturer of the 4th Manhattan District and a past District Deputy Grand Master of the 4th Manhattan District as well.
My name is Michael Lifshitz. I've been a Mason for almost 20 years now. I've been a Master of my Lodge, High Priest of my chapter, illustrious master of my council, commander of my commandery, presider over all the bodies of the Scottish Rite, and was honored to be coronated a 33rd degree Mason.
How are we feeling?
Well, great. Well, good to see you.
Great. I love that. Wonderful to see everybody. Welcome.
Thank you. And thanks for inviting us to participate.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for reading the text. It's not often that we get to do a selection that's the full text from start to finish. So I was really pleased when, Cliff, you had chosen the Fama as opposed to just a selection from a much longer text. So we get to have a very comprehensive conversation about it today. Let's just jump into some questions. What was your initial reaction when you first read the text? And did you find any part of the Fama that resonated with you? And if so, like what and how?
How I answer that depends on when I first read it. Because when I first read it, it was almost impenetrable to me because I was a young Mason and I didn't know anything. Of course, this time around, I have more of an understanding. The part that had always struck me as interesting were the list of things that they were required to do, how they should dress. They shouldn't. They have to wear the dress of the people of the country where they reside, and that they would meet once a year. But we were talking earlier how heal the sick and that for free. And what intrigues me about that is, well, that presupposes that you have the skills to heal the sick beforehand. So where did they get that particular knowledge from to be able to go out and do that? You know, the emphasis was, well, if you're going to do it for free. But where did they gain that medical knowledge to be able to go out and actually treat someone? Was that part of the teachings of the order, or was that something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that the Fama has been considered like the Gospel of Paracelsus, and or I'm very curious as to if the book M that they're referring to was perhaps a treaty from Paracelsus, or if the healing factor that they're talking about is something that they found in Damkar, which in my reading is a place that doesn't actually exist in the physical world. It's a place from within. I suppose same question to both Michael, Mikey. What do you guys think was your first impression when you got to reading the Fama?
My first impression was definitely that there are deep and powerful truths contained within this work, and it is the type of work that can take a lifetime to understand in and of itself. The thing that resonated very much for me was the references to nature, the continued references to nature, that nature is an open book to them, right? And that this is about finding your harmony with nature. And if everything within nature is contained within us, then the healing comes from within us. It doesn't in my interpretation, doesn't necessarily imply direct medical knowledge, but knowledge of how the process of life expresses itself through you. And the deeper you understand that, the more in harmony you will be and the less ill you will be, essentially.
And I think for me, it's the same issue that Cliff has. Are we talking about the first time you've ever read this? The first impressions that you got now that we had to read it for this, or somewhere in between, because we grow as individuals and our perspective changes?
Absolutely. So a little bit of both.
So first, it was the fascination. And again, we're going back to when I was a preteen. I think it was like 14 or something like that. So it was just like, this was this amazing world that now I have to go find, because this is something so cool, so amazing. I want to experience this. And again, the first time I read it, I did not actually retain any of the jabs that they took, at the Pope, at the elite, educated people who were very much materialistic and not spiritual. On the when I was reading it now, again, I get the dynamic and the demographic to the factors of the time period. But what was really struck to me, especially in the copy that you gave, was the introduction. This thing that really that I took away, that I think everybody should take away at one point in their journey, is that everything is done through the grace of God. So whatever it is you do is because you have the grace of God. Whatever abilities and opportunities that you have and other people have is through the grace of God. The angels or spirits that you might interact with is because God has essentially given them grace to do that, has attributed them, given them those attributions. And according to the text, the attribution is the gift that he gives them. The gift is the power that they have. So whether it's like Archangel Raphael, who, heals the sick or helps people heal the sick, or Gabriel the messenger, or any spirit or entity that has that gift and power, it's because God has given them grace to do that. That's, I think, at the end of the day, is what was so important for me on at least this particular go around.
In the text, they refer to both Kabbalistic and Islamic traditions being too fixed in their position, and that they're coming in with this flexibility of allowing for knowledge to continue to grow. We see so much conflict that arises when there's a tyrannical hold on what information or science or culture might be. But in reality, God is continuing to evolve. The world is continuing to unfold, and there is a natural progression of life. And the learned to get together annually, which they talk about, one of the things that Father C.R. is privy to early on is how both the East and Western traditions would come together to discuss what they had learned.
For the sake of the people that are watching and listening, I think we need to separate the learned, because right now you're referring to the learned as the members of the order. In the text, they refer to the learned as the aristocratic, educated men.
That's what I'm talking about, is like, because it's at that part, and I think that's the vocabulary that they use, is the learned Africa and from the Middle East were coming together to discuss what they had learned and writing that down to progress their science.
I think the Fama, I believe, was printed in 1614. And I think a lot of this is comes up as a result of the Protestant Reformation, of which Freemasonry is also a part of. It was in the 1500s that Martin Luther hung his 95 Thesis on the Cathedral of Wittenberg. And so, yes, I think the rigidity of the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope, yes, that was one of the things that they were staunchly against. I mean, most folk didn't own their own Bible. I mean, Gutenberg came along and changed all that. And I think the Rosicrucians were just trying to give to the people a sense of that, their own sense of spirituality, that they could be in charge of their own spirituality. You didn't have to have a middleman, so to speak, between you and God. You could commune with God, and you could establish that relationship on your own, and you didn't have to pay, money to the church to constantly have your slate wiped clean so you can get into the kingdom of heaven.
And it was a less dogmatic understanding.
Absolutely.
It was published at the real beginning of when accepted Masonry or speculative Masonry started to infuse its way into operative lodges. It's also right at the beginning of the expansion to colonize the Americas. So right after the establishment of Jamestown in Virginia, which is interesting. Even I think when they refer to that Europe has a child, and that they need to amass wealth so that they can grandfather and afford their offspring. I think that they're referring to that expansion. Yeah. I am wondering too, though, what do we think of if Father CRC represents a literal figure or an allegory?
I think he's more of an allegory than an actual person. It's quite possible that some of it is based on the travels of an individual who we may not know, but I think it's presented in an allegorical form as a way, as an alchemical process of the journey of the soul, so to speak. I've never read it that he was an actual person. I never felt that way. I'm not sure.
So to me, very similar to you. Were there people who traveled around assuming knowledge, trying to get initiated in initiatory schools of mystery traditions? Absolutely. To me, especially where I am currently, it is very much an allegory. It is very much a retelling of the story of Christ for that particular time period. There's just, for me personally, there's just too many similarities for it not to be a retelling. But it's a retelling with a lens for the time period.
When you mention the allegory for Christ, the Bible talks about the missing years, so to speak, where Christ traveled to the east. Do you think that it encompasses some of that, or might be hinting at those missing years?
So again, and to me, that allegory of the Christ is an archetype of essentially you. If you are living, let's say for their time, right? They're living in Germany, right? So if you're living in Germany, you know everything that Germany has to offer. So if you don't go outside, you are complete. You are a full person. You have nothing more to learn. You have nothing more to transcend past. So you go to this undiscovered land. And for me, the interesting thing is he had this traveling companion. They were going to go to Jerusalem, where they were supposed to transcend and unify with divinity. But what's interesting for me is that his leader dies, his mentor dies, his guide. Now, the individual has a couple of options. And it says so in the text. In a lot of the instances, if your guide dies, you would go back. But what am I supposed to do now? There's nobody to lead me. You can continue on the path towards your goal, whatever that was. For them, it was Jerusalem. What happens in our case? He essentially diverts his path. On their path to Jerusalem, and it's not really divert, right? Essentially, Arabia is on the way to Jerusalem, right?
What I find interesting is they're traveling to Damkar, which is not an actual geographical place, and it could be a bastardization of Damascus or another name, but it could also be referring to, and I've got a note on here because I don't want to misrepresent it. But Damkar in Arabia could be a corruption of Damascus. It could be a corruption of Damar, which is a part in Yemen, or there could be a connection to the Latin Dimcaris, which is one who teaches or instructs. If it is the latter, if it is a reference to a place of instruction and wisdom, that it's not a geographical location, and that then Father CR has traveled to a place within themselves or to a spiritual place that's outside of this realm. And that's where he's getting instructed in.
I agree with both you guys that I think, or all of us really, that it's more of an allegory. I think that there are potentially people that it could be drawing a composite understanding of those who went to the East, or those who went to Arabia, those who went to Africa and came back with knowledge, but if us today, as individuals, if we are going to gain the deeper knowledge out of this work, I think it has to be thought of as allegorical. Everything becomes an allegory for the self when you understand that you only have a subjective experience in life.
So I have a little bit of a consistency issue here. If all the places that he went to were fictional, then you can say it's all internal. But if some places are, real that you can find on a map, some are fictional, then to me, going inside and getting it from a higher plane of existence is the second stage. First, the person traveled, got initiated into different mystery schools. He was taught in those mystery schools, came back, tried to spread it or stayed there or continued traveling and learning. After he had a certain base knowledge of the things that he received from these mystery initiations, then he can then continue to work with himself to then transcend from the material plane to the higher planes of existence, bring stuff back there. Western mystery traditions, especially Western mystery traditions, they love to use the Kabbalistic tree of life as the framework for their initiation. And they have two benchmarks: the Veil of Perikath and the Void. And you cannot physically go there yourself. That's why in these traditions, they tell you somebody has to come from beyond that veil to lead you through it. So in that instance, you do kind of need a guide. You do need somebody who has been there to help you get there. For me, I do believe that, there are other planes of existence that you can get to where you can get the information from, but you have to have somebody who at least guides you part of the way. Are there exceptions? Absolutely. There are, once in a lifetime, there is an individual who doesn't need an initiatic process, who does not need a guide, who has so much divine grace that they're able to connect with divinity themselves and they can transcend themselves. But those people are just so, so rare and so far and few in between that for the majority of us, for the general public, we do need that guide to take us beyond that veil.
But then that perhaps even just leads into confirming that Father CR is this allegorical, once in a million figure. When one of the reasons he travels to Damkar and pays the Arabians to bring him there is because he's too sickly to travel himself anymore. Here we have this young man who's close to death, perhaps, having this mystical experience where when he arrives in Damkar, he's greeted by people who are awaiting him, who already know his name, which when you look in the eyes of like shamanism or connecting with a spirit guide or connecting with a higher body, you're connecting with somebody who is already your familiar. And so I think that to me leads my interpretation of the text to that he's talking about these two worlds. He's talking about the knowledge that's gained in the material world on the map, and then the knowledge that's gained from traveling to this place beyond the map.
But that's the beauty of these allegorical, almost like path working, because let's talk about the Fama, right? The Fama is essentially leading you on a story of Christian Rosenkreuz and his legacy. I mean, it's always layered. Like a good initiatic experience will be layered. You have the material interpretation, the physical interpretation, the intellectual interpretation, the emotional interpretation, and the spiritual interpretation. So these initiatic processes are supposed to affect you on multiple levels. And I think that's what we're talking about here. On the one aspect, he had a physical journey and he had a spiritual journey, ascension journey at the same time. That's why you're getting this almost like convoluted concept of this place is real, this place isn't. This place is real, this place isn't, because he's trying to work on you almost like as a self-initiation process on multiple levels.
I do find it interesting too, though, in his travels, that going to Jerusalem with his teacher or his traveling companion, he's going to the west and then he travels east. And for those who know, that's something to be considered. I wonder how much of that connection actually works itself in to perhaps later mystical traditions.
Well, it's interesting because based on what Michael had just said earlier, I was thinking of Freemasonry for one, and especially since we recently conferred the 17th and 18th degree, and I think that kind of fits in to what we're discussing now because the 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 candidate is taken on this journey by basically Raphael, who's leading him on this path, on this journey, where he does travel on the shores of uh, uh, I guess it's the Dead Sea, one of the seas. But this is how I think certain aspects of Rosicrucianism enters into Freemasonry, and how some of it has been embraced by Freemasonry. I mean, we feel that Jean-Baptiste Villemoz probably wrote our 17th and 18th degree, as well as the Feast of the Paschal Lamb, which has very strong Rosicrucian elements. But the journey of that candidate mirrors the journey of Christian Rosenkreuz in the Fama.
Well, and what's interesting too, and it's still preserved in what the Valley of New York City confers for their 17th and 18th, but in the older version, I believe of the 18th, they're actually unlocking the seals one by one.
Yes. I think that's important. Since we got to this topic, I wasn't going to go there. But I think since we're talking about the Book of Seven Seals, we do bridge into Book M, the Book T, because they do talk about the different books. And I think and also the correlations that the influence of the names of these books had on future initiatory traditions and schools.
So that actually is a great question. Like, what is the book M? Is it based on a real book, or is it again an allegorical representation of something?
I don't know about Book M. I think it's probably referencing some text, some mystical text. We were talking earlier, very often when you're reading esoteric things, they mention Book T, and Book T usually means the tarot. In this case, Book M, I've not been able to discern what that could be, but it's probably of a metaphysical nature, I would imagine. Not that that's an oversimplification of the use of the letter M in its description.
Something that definitely came to my mind a lot when thinking about these other books and going through this work was all the things that have been lost to time. You know, all the libraries that these individuals were able to draw from that we no longer have any contact with, that have all been burned or lost or destroyed. You know, like there's so much ancient knowledge that did exist that no longer does. So anything that made it through to this moment in time is impressive. But like, that's what I kept thinking about is like the library at Alexandria, where great knowledge was lost in Mexico when the conquistadors came in. They destroyed so much knowledge, you know, like, and who knows how that was connected with the pyramid builders of Egypt, you know, like, and so M, you know, it's hard to say. It's hard to say what he's trying to.
It is hard to say. And one of the things I really loved about this translation in the Rosicrucian trilogy is that some of the footnotes, and I was really interested when I got to this one place, and can we read here, page 29, furthermore, following the instructions and command of our Rota, we published various booklets, including the book M. Hoch, composed by the greatly loved MP instead of various domestic duties. And so here, all of a sudden, we give more than just the book M. We're referring to a book, M. Hoch, which, according to this footnote here, is an abbreviation for and I'm going to probably bastardize this pronunciation, but the Mystique Hochzeits, which is the mystical wedding, referring to the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, which then Johann Valentin Andre's chemical wedding, was that something that he had written prior to these other texts? And does that connect into it? And if so, then this is really, he's referring to a path-working reality as the book. However, there's such a wide breadth of, especially Islamic Arabic texts that had already translated earlier Roman and Egyptian texts, and to Sternfeld, to your point, it's perhaps referencing something that has been lost to time.
Going back with the story and the allegory, right? He goes to Arabia, which is supposed to be at the forefront of knowledge and wisdom at the time. So what we know from the text is it had to deal something with knowledge of plants, herbalism, knowledge of the minerals and stones. It had to deal with anatomy, physiology. Mathematics is always one. That they mentioned those things. What is the oldest known public book of magic that we have?
Picatrix?
Picatrix. Where's Picatrix from?
From the Middle East.
It's an Arabic grimoire, and it's an astrological grimoire, which means it deals with astrology, which was one of the things that they studied. Essentially the movement of the stars, the visions in the sky.
And I think that's a really interesting point too, because I believe there's a part of the Confessio that's actually pulled directly from the Picatrix. If it is that then the lifeblood of what developed into Rosicrucianism, or is the lifeblood in this concept of Eastern meeting Western doctrine?
Personally, again, I will stand firm on this concept of this is the retelling of the Christos mythos to the people of the time. Again, I don't want to sound heretical here, but the Christian mythos is not the first time we tried to reach God. It's another way of pumping blood into there's only one God, there's only one source, everything else emanates. The Kabbalist had that. Kether is true and unchanneled divine light. It gets channeled through Chokmah, then it gets separated. Duality only happens after Bina, but everything prior to that is one. Now, whether you get it from the East, whether you get it from the West, whether you get it from one culture or tradition, whether you get it from another culture and tradition, at the end of it, God is one.
Well, and I think even in the Fama, there's reference to the monad.
Yes.
And John Dee's work would certainly have been very much in the zeitgeist of the day. Even in the construction of the tomb itself, the light suspended in there, the artificial light, is sort of this allusion to Kepler, an allusion to the monad.
But it's microcosm and macrocosm. They're trying to put the universe into a physical space. They're saying that's it's a reflection, right? We talk about the hierarchies, like this is divinity, this is the archangelic realm, this is the core of angels, this is the angels, so forth and so on, until you get to kings and spirits and stuff like that. But they're trying to make a reflection of the universe.
Which is part of the thematic presentation of the Fama, is that father, or at that point brother CRC, had mastered this microcosm. He had constructed this microcosm, and it was in that he had found his wisdom.
You mentioned earlier, you made reference to the idea that the seed contains the entire tree within it. And, you know, the individual cell of our body contain, you know, all of us in it. And I think that's the macrocosm, microcosm, and that we ourselves, we have everything within us that came from the one, the monad, in a series of emanations.
God's the seed, and everything will go from Him.
I think that's a great time to bring up that quote, too, that thence arises the recognition of the beautiful unity, whereby just as every seed contains the whole tree and its fruit, so likewise the whole world is contained in miniature in every human being, with his religion, politics, health, bodily parts, natural traits, speech, words, and works, all of which partake of the same tune and melody as God, heaven, and earth.
It's a beautiful quote. And I feel like that, for me, that was one of the greatest takeaways from this entire work, is that all of this work is already encased within you. That all of this understanding is already within yourself. It is about finding ways to express this in your life. And through that, you will heal sickness. You will leave sickness behind in this way.
It's funny because what comes to mind, I'm gonna need some help here, but when we see the word or the letters vitriol, was it visit the interior and earth, and then so I think that ties in because it's again it's saying that it's all in, it's an interior journey that one is taking, not an external.
But that's why we are the microcosm of the macrocosm. So everything that everything that exists within the universe exists within us. And if we can master ourselves, we can master the universe.
I've got this good question, though, that parlays off of like names. Why do you think everybody's name is just abbreviated in the text?
I don't know, my take on it, most Rosicrucian societies, when you become a member, you take on a nomen mysticum, a mystical name. You don't use your, technically, you don't use your profane name within that context. So I think some of the initials might be for their mystical name and not actually their profane name.
It's interesting too, like when we track with that, even in the progression of the story, we start with Father CR and then we end up with Brother CRC in reference to the same, which then also starts with if it Friar CRC as coming from a place of a monastery, becoming brother, they've established now that they are part of an order where they are on the level with their peers. But I do find that, and that in my mind was sort of the reasoning why the C. Then we start with just CR, why then CRC.
But you had mentioned earlier the difference between brother and frater. You were going to make a comment about that.
Yeah. So for me, maybe it was the translation that I was reading, but the initials weren't adding up. It's like I could not trace those lines from, this person succeeded this person succeeded this person succeeded this person. And I tried to go back. And again, maybe it was the translation, a type or a misprint, but like the names weren't adding up. So, or the initials weren't adding up. And this is where I truly believe that there was a separation between brother and frater. Mm-hmm. Right. We can argue which one came first or which one came second. But again, one was probably the initials of their names. The other one was either their mystic nomen or their motto. And as Cliff has said, in some Rosicrucian traditions, they will do a motto, which is their highest aspirations. What is their ultimate goal in their spiritual journey? Another ones could be mystic nomen. By choosing a mystic nomen or a motto, the highest aspiration that you want to achieve to, or taking on a trait or characteristic of another human being, you're saying the old Cliff is dead. Now, whatever name or mystic nomen Cliff decides to be, life starts from that point on. Does his personality stop being? No. But the changing of the name separates him from his profane life. We shock the psyche to have an altered state of understanding and consciousness. We separate ourselves from that material goals and views that we just described, and we start looking more towards divinity and God. And how do we get there? It's very rare that you just have an epiphany realization, you quit cold turkey, and now you're divine, you can start to levitate and heal people. Usually it's in stages, it's in gradual stages. Again, are there exceptions? Absolutely. Do they come often? Absolutely not. But it could happen. Most of the time, we need the process. And that's why I believe that the names change and the names are abbreviation. What's also interesting to me is they were all kind of aristocrats or very well off, because how else can you go travel to foreign countries and still sustain yourself there and do the good work?
With that, what's interesting too, right at the beginning of the text, is the presentation of Father CR is that he comes from a noble family, but without money. To me, it stood out. Then why would you include that in the text? That there's something about being of nobility, but of poverty, which is an allusion, if we're going to talk about like an allegory to Christ too, in the lineage of the line of David, that is, here you have essentially a priest born or adopted into poverty.
I mean, Mikey just kind of got a lot of this out there. I'm in a similar agreement, like it's about secrecy and representation, like it's in the same way that we take the title of brother in Masonry, right? Like it is about a new understanding, about trying to see yourself in a new light.
So I'm not very familiar with gematria, but I was curious enough to kind of throw around some of the letters and then see what would come up. And in a reverse ordinal gematria, where you take the English alphabet and you prescribe the 1 to 26 backwards on it, CR is 33. RC is 33. And so from there, even exploring the progression and presentation of some of the names, there is one part in the text where you get like 44, 66, 33. And then you get these interesting divisions of the way that the names are presented, which, again, this is not necessarily my rabbit hole, but I'm sure someone out there, it is their rabbit hole. So I think perhaps there is some sort of connection to these being the mystical names that these brothers took on. I'm very curious if or something there, like what is the statement that these numbers are representing for each individual? The tomb of Father CRC is described as a 7-sided vault, and it's filled with symbols and hidden messages. What might that shape and design suggest?
That's my cup of tea.
That I will defer to you.
So, from some of the esoteric and initiation traditions that we know, drawing from numbers, right? Whenever they're trying to refer to 12, they'll go to either the tribes, the apostles, the zodiac. When they go to 7, they usually go through the 7 planets that were visible by the naked eye from the time. Now, and again, this is where the Rosicrucian tradition continues. That, again, I'm not telling anybody anything secret. A lot of Rosicrucian doctrines have been published. A lot of Rosicrucian initiations have been published. Normally, the vault of the adepti is a 7-sided vault. Each vault will correlate to a particular planet. Now, this is where I believe this text goes a little further. Each wall or each panel was a chest door, right? In some places, they're saying it's a chest. In some places, saying it's a door, and there's another room behind each panel. And each room or chest had its own different theme or particular study or subject of study, to be correct. So each planet correlates to a particular attribute or a particular force or a particular, whichever term you want to use for it. a particular characteristical trait. And in some of the spiritual traditions, they say that each planet has a soul. And that soul is essentially also the soul of an angel. So each angel controls the planet, so to speak. In other traditions, they will say, the planet has a soul, and then there's an angel that's attributed to it. So there's a guardian for each one. Depends which tradition you want to go to. But I thought that it was very interesting that there's 7 planets, 7 panels, which all have, you can essentially, Mars is, if you want to essentially have something that's very strong, very aggressive, very masculine, you want Mars. If you want something more feminine, you want something more loving, something with compassion, you want like Venus, right? So different characteristics, different attributes, different skill sets, different personalities. So I think it was interesting that within each trunk or within each room, past the panel, was its particular field of study.
And I think an important part to that quote and that this idea is right at the end of that. The book states that through all the symbols in this room, through all of the understanding in this room, the entire order can be reconstituted through this knowledge. But it's not like this is how our order works. This is just the nature of existence. Right? This is the nature of the universe as we understand it as these Rosicrucians that wrote this book, right? So I thought that was really key to seeing this as an allegory and getting deeper into the understanding like Mikey just did, that this number 7 is not about the walls of an actual room. This is about the confines of reality as we find it and how we express ourselves as individuals in it.
That's why I would think, if I had to set this up, right? You take like a year per, whether it's planet, or a year per characteristic and attribute. Okay, this year, your process is room 1. You go into room 1, you study the art of that room 1. You master room 1, you go to room 2. And again, this is sort of the way that the Kabbalistic tree of life is built, where, first you go through Malkuth, you master Malkuth, then you go to Yesod, you master Yesod, Chod, Nedzek, Tiferet, so on and so forth. But everything that is essentially everything that is contained within the material world is contained with Malkuth.
And isn't the ascension up the tree to get to Tippereth, and then essentially everything, Tippereth is as high as we go as humans in existence, right? Potentially. We have the potential to get there. Consciousness. So maybe the 7 is those first 6 Sephira and then everything beyond the veil, right?
So according to the Kabbalistic the Kabbalistic mythos of that particular tradition, you could pass the veil of Paraketh in material form. Have I passed it? I don't know, probably not. Otherwise, I'd be a little smarter by now. But what they say is you cannot pass the void in material form. That's why, the most we can go is 7 steps. Everything past that is theory. It's what we think it is. And anybody who's in an order who will tell you, I'm a 10th grade, I'm a 10th degree, I am a 9th this, I'm an 8th that, in theory. Could you be 7th? Yeah, according to the Kabbalistic and Hebraic mythology and tradition. So this is just a, caveat emptor, buyer beware. If somebody tells you, I can give you certain things, be a little realistic. Can they actually do that for you, or is that wishful thinking? Are they projecting their desires onto themselves and saying, this is what I am, instead of this is what I want to be?
Cliff, you have any thoughts?
I don't have anything to add to that. I think Mike said it very well, as he usually does.
Well, thank you, because I remember a time where I used to sit at a table like this, and you were the one talking on the other side.
Well, thank you.
Um, I wonder, there's the reference that Brother CRC at this point had constructed that microcosm, and whether that is the allusion to something being constructed inside of himself, or is that the allusion to this room? And then again, like here we have this point where they have to transport through a wall. They transport through the masonry of this wall into a chamber which reflects the microcosm of the known universe at the time, and that within there, all of the information is found, including the treaty by Paracelsus on healing, which got me thinking if the 6 rules of the order are also then an allusion to each of those sides, and that one of those 7 sides is actually the entrance into the room. Just a little bit of
So I think I know what you're referring to, right? There was a nail that they pulled out, which pulled up the essentially plaster, which then gave them access to it. And I think that's the allusion to the veil. That's the illusion of piercing the veil. Because before that, they didn't know any of the stuff existed. And now they do. Now they're on their process. I think all of this, the vault, is a two-layered or multi-layered process. Because on the one thing is, where did he teach these people? Did he teach them in his house? Did he teach them in, a library? Where did he teach them? So I think some kind of structure needed to be built. So on the one level, there's a physical something. Can we find it right now? No. And some people assume that it's a sepulcher, but we know that they're in Germany. The sepulcher is in Jerusalem. So it can't be that. It's a nice illusion. It's a nice story. It's a nice allegory. So I think there was a physical thing. But again, you are building a temple of yourself. Especially, this rings true for Masonry, because we're saying there was the first temple, there was the second temple. The third temple is in the heart of man. So you have a physical structure and you have a spiritual structure. So I think it is a stage. I think it is a process. And I think they're trying to show us in this story, in this allegory, that initiation works on multiple levels. You need those levels. It would be nice if we can find the actual structure. That would be cool. But I think the fact that it existed, or they're telling us it existed, it makes it real. If they didn't put us something that was real, they're like, okay, that's not achievable. If something is physically real, it is deemed for us achievable.
And that's even alluded to in the text too, because the brothers of the order who found the tomb were not familiar with Brother CRC until after they found the room. And so you're really right in regard that without that physical space, then how do they actually define the foundation of their order?
And I think this is the interesting thing is for people, and again, for those of you watching, like, this is really nerdy stuff. It takes a certain kind of individual to want to geek out to this stuff. So just keep that in mind.
And some of us are more geeky than others.
Absolutely. I wasn't going to get out of bed if it wasn't for this particular book. I'd say call somebody else. But this makes us think that they were attracted or recruited, or however you want to call it, because they were searching for a tradition. They were searching for certain knowledge. They were searching for certain secrets. They were searching for certain mysteries. So they probably met somebody who they were like, this is somebody I want to emulate, or this person has something that I want to learn. So they were studying this tradition. They didn't actually know what this tradition was until that happened. And they pretty much say in that text that, only this particular beloved brother, I believe the term they use, who succeeded this other brother who's now dead, so you can't actually fact check it now. That brother knew that Christian Rosenkreuz existed, but he didn't tell him where he was buried. He just told him that the mythos exists. So now they have a vague connection to the mythos, but they have no way to find it. How can they say we don't know where he was buried and when he died, and then they find the actual body? If they find the actual body, then and it was preserved, then we should have a physical location. We should have the physical body. But we're going back to this concept of Christ was crucified, he was put in a sepulcher, and he ascended up. Now you can't find the body. You can find the location, right? You can go see the sepulcher, but you can't find the transcended body.
Well, and again, in the room too, that orb, the illumination of the room is directly above the circular altar, which the body is found beneath. Which so you have then the construction of the room in itself is God. You have the illumination, which is the Holy Spirit, and then you have the Son and the body. And the separation of the illumination, which is also the teaching that has gone on to inspire and bring to light these other brothers who have come back to find Brother CRC. You have this like representation of the macrocosm and microcosm of the Trinity, all contained within this one room.
Absolutely. I think what's important for me also is that throughout this text, they go bookend, 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 bookend. Bookend's where our knowledge is. Bookend's what we're going to give you. Bookend is the laws of the universe, the secrets of how to master this world. But then when they open up his coffin, he is holding book T.
Which I would really love to share this quote. And one of the things that I really love about the text that Cliff had recommended is that they actually translate the Latin inscription that they find as the eulogy to Book T. In his hand, he held a book written in gold on parchment called T, which, after the Bible, is now our greatest treasure and should not lightly be exposed to the censure of the world. At the end of the book was the following Latin eulogy. A grain buried in the heart of Jesus, Christian Rosenkreuz, sprung from the noble and illustrious German family of Rosenkreuz. He was a beacon of his age and an ornament for future centuries. Through divine revelation, holy, subtle investigations, and tireless efforts, he was admitted into the mysteries and secrets of heaven and earth. In his journeys through Arabia and Africa, he collected a treasure surpassing that of kings and emperors. However, as it was not congenial to his age, he preserved it in an ingenious manner for posterity to uncover. Further, he appointed trusted people and close friends to be the heirs of his arts and also of his name, and he created a miniature world corresponding in all motions to the greater one. Finally, after he had created this compendium of things, past, present, and future, being more than 100 years old, he gave his illuminated soul, now through sickness, which he had never felt in his own body, and never allowed others to be afflicted by, but rather summoned by the divine Spirit, back to God the Creator, amid the last kisses of his brethren, our much loved Father, most sweet brother, most faithful teacher, and most unblemished friend, he was hidden here by his own kind for 120 years. Underneath, they had signed in Latin, Brother IA, chosen by Brother C and head of the fraternity, Brothers S, G, V, M, P, S, Brother RC, Jr., inheritor of the house of the Holy Spirit, Brother BMPA, painter and master builder, Brother GGMPI, Kabbalist. In the second circle, in Latin, Brother PA, successor to Father IO, mathematician, Brother A, successor to PD, Brother R, successor to Father CRC, who is rejoicing with Christ. At the end was written in Latin, we are born in God, we die in Jesus, we live again in the Spirit.
I think that this is where they're pretty much setting the stage for his spiritual line of succession, because they're saying in the heart of Christ was the seed, and from the seed was born Christian Rosenkreuz. So they're saying that his line, whether it's physical or not, in this case, seems more spiritual, is that he can draw his spiritual connection to Christ. So there's Christ, he comes from that Christ line. And then they go on to say a lot more stuff. I think what's interesting is that in the Hebraic tradition, the ideal age to live to is 120, and says he lived for 120. So again, because they're trying to set the mythos here, they're pretty much drawing the connection to Christ, and they're drawing the connection to the Kabbalistic Hebraic tradition. So they're trying to combine those two.
I was going to say, and essentially, Christ must have come with some sort of understanding of Kabbalah as well, right? Like he
That
comes out of the Jewish tradition, and this is the formation out of Jewish mystical tradition.
there is a theory that that Jesus Christ was essentially a rabbi before he went on his journey, because they're essentially there's historical accounts. However, you want to verify them is up to you. Him quoting texts, in Hebraic text, right? The Gospels weren't written yet, but again, anything that's dealing with the life of Christ had to have been written during his life or after his life.
Yeah,
So what would he be teaching and preaching at the time? And again, most of the scholars will pretty much agree that it's whatever the Hebraic rabbinical tradition would have been at the time.
But yeah, I mean, the oldest gospel was written 30 years after the death of Christ. So the writers of the gospels weren't eyewitness,
Yes.
witnesses to the events that took place. And then some go further to say that the gospels, especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which they call synoptic, in that they see with one eye, John's gospel being the one that really is different and contains things in it that you don't find in the other three, was that when you open the Bible, the gospels come before the epistles of Paul, but chances are that Paul wrote the epistles first, and that the writers of the gospels used his epistles to write the gospels. That's why, they kind of see with one eye, basically, that, but they probably were written after, not before, even though that's the way it's presented.
That's why I love like old Bibles when they were all different, because the family Bible would have the apocrypha that was special to that family and that tradition.
I would love to also just plug that I'm really excited that both of you are going to be leading the conversation for Grand Lodge's Esoteric Committee.
No, three of us. Three of us. It's a three-man team. And so, as we talk about this, Freemasonry is a system of morals veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. If all it was is a system of morals, why do we need Freemasonry? Why do we need initiation? What the esoterical course does is we take the spiritual perspective on this. So we talk about things like Rosicrucianism, things like Hermeticism, things like mysticism, and how does initiation affect you on a spiritual level?
Freemasonry is esoteric. A big part of this course of study is to open that door for individual brethren to be able to start drawing those correlations and exploring the depths of this craft from a new perspective.
I mean, me and you, the three of us have spoke about this before. We are a Western initiatic tradition. Why are we Western? Why not Eastern or any other tradition?
How do all of these mystical traditions return to the same primordial element that defines what it is that we are in the microcosm and what that macrocosm may be?
I like, there's a quote that was used on the covers of the Equinox, that was published by Crow. But I know it's probably not good that I quote him, but I think the on the magazine it says the goal of religion, the method of science, and I think that's part of a lot of what Rosicrucianism and maybe even Freemasonry does. In other words, the things that you do as a Rosicrucian, whether it's perform a ceremony, it's scientific. If you followed, if it says, on such and such a day at such and such an hour, put on these clothes and perform these things, that you will get the same result that someone got 100 years ago. It's a scientific method for uniting oneself with God.
Well, and you know what's really beautiful with that too, in that frame of mind, is when we see the emergence of speculative masonry, accepted masonry. It parallels the rise of the Royal Society, and here we have a branch of intellectuals who are trying to determine what the actual physical constitutions of the mathematics and science really are, cut from more of the folklore or the mystical traditions, which are then given a vocabulary to explore and a framework to work within through Freemasonry.
There's something I would love to add to this particular moment, because it was something that I wanted to double back to from that first quote of the points of Rosicrucianism, of those six, I think it was 6 points, right, that he names.
Yeah.
And how that related to Masonry for me, that reading that very much resonated with our work in Masonry here, particularly the parts of that we meet at a certain time. They meet it. This is an allegory for later, larger things, right? But you meet once a year. These guys were to meet, go spread the word, come meet back once a year. That we wear the garb of the society that we're in, and that we find a proper successor. And these, I think, are all really important aspects to Masonry. Wearing the garb of the society, I think, is a larger allegory for the way that we act. It's, we are hidden in plain sight. You know what I mean? We might operate in secrecy, but we're in the general clothes of the world that we're in. We're on 23rd Street. We are not trying to hide from anybody. We're on 23rd Street and 6th Avenue. We got a big flag outside our building. Like, we give free tours, so we are in the garb of society in this way. And it is a exceedingly important lesson to find a proper successor, especially as you go through the chairs and you are, as a master of your lodge. The lodge is your responsibility until you find a proper successor. But one of the great lessons of this deeper knowledge and strength and power that comes from being a master of your lodge is that there is always a time that you need to give this up. You are not the only master of your lodge. You are not the one that isn't, this isn't because of you. You are a part of this greater whole. You cannot operate without your lodge. You are not just a master, you are a master as a member among brethren, and you cannot function without support within the membership. So that struck me in those key points, that how this relates to what we do as Masons.
Well said. I know I could continue talking about this almost indefinitely, and we're going down this rabbit hole now too, that's reaching outside of the text. And before I give this last question to kind of wrap up our conversation here, I do want to thank each of you for being part of this. I do really, really appreciate, Cliff, your making this as a selection for the conversation. I really appreciate and love the participation, Sternfeld, Lipschitz, from you guys being here, brothers, reading the text to contribute to the conversation.
Thank you. Next time, Michael, you sit over here. I think you should sit.
No, what you call it? We give you, as you said, you were the tour guide, so we give you respect for.
I've been learning from you since I first joined into Masonry. So
Thank you. I'm just like so humble. Yeah, because like I said, I'm just, like I'm the tour guy. Oh, what are you interested in? Oh, you're interested in that? Well, you should go talk to this person over here.
I do have one final question for our little conversation, that the members of the secret fraternity will not make themselves known unless they see fitting a sort of "don't call us, we'll call you" kind of presentation to the world. And Why do you think the text maintains this air of mystery, and how realized is this sense of we will find people who are of the same yoke?
I think it's a very important aspect of Rosicrucianism. You may have noticed that all of us sitting around here, no one sitting here has ever admitted to being a member of a Rosicrucian order. We just talked about it. I think it's not for everyone. There was this thing once upon a time called the Inquisition, and it's not called the Invisible College for nothing. When sometimes I'm approached by younger brothers who are interested, I said, well, why don't you stand up in your lodge or, somewhere and give a talk on something? It doesn't have to be, you know, hours, 3 hours, just give a short talk on something that's of interest to you because you never know who's sitting out in your audience. And maybe one day someone, if they don't tap you on your shoulder, you might get a letter in the mail saying, please show up at this place at this time, in your tuxedo, and that's it. Most Rosicrucian orders, for the most part, are invitational. You have to be invited in, um, and they're always around you. You just never know.
I mean, I thought it was interesting from the context. We know that people literally used to write to the newspapers like, I am interested in being a Rosicrucian. Here's my contact information. Contact me, because they couldn't find where to go. But the interesting thing for me, again, for me, it's always practicality. How is this going to work? Don't call us, we'll call you. How are they going to know who to call? And this is where the practice comes in. This is where you are supposed to reach a certain state where you can commune or they can commune to you. It's almost like a radio, right? You can scream all you want, me, 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 me. But if you don't turn the radio on, you don't tune it to the right channel, they could be going, today, 4 o'clock, 6th floor, Grand Lodge, show up if you want this. You have to want this. And this is what they're saying. Essentially, you have to want this, but we decide when you're ready, right? When the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
It's interesting in well, to use masonry as a basis in our ritual. I mean, we say we bring the candidate to light at a certain point. The master stands at the altar and urges upon each that he faithfully direct his steps through life. By the light he there shall find, and as he there shall find it. But nowhere along the way do we actually say that we're going to give you the light. So the light is always something that you have to search for. It's something that the individual has to search for. Nobody's going to walk up and place it in your lap. It is a search and it is a quest. And I think if one is questing for that light and searching for that light, that eventually they will find it.
But they also tell you in the text, in the manifestos, they tell you that the most important book is the Holy Bible. The book M is the most important after the Holy Bible. They tell you the most important thing is the volume of sacred law, the Word of God. That's where everything comes from. But another interesting thing about Masonry, we always tell you, is this an act of your own free will and accord? Do you want to cross through that door? Are you ready to take the obligation? It's always your choice. We always give you a choice.
It's trying to prepare the candidate for doing this work on his own because, no one walks out of their Master Mason degree a master of themselves, fully prepared for everything that life will bring you. Oh, I walked out of this degree now, and now I have a perfect outlet for all my passions. I don't get angry. I don't get sad. I'm like in perfect harmony with the world around me. It's a lifetime's journey to get there. We give you the basis information, and it's up to you to figure out how to interpret that for yourself, because there is not a dogma to this understanding. This is about a personal journey. So to relate it back to this last question, yeah, I think mystery schools should all be entered with a sense of mystery.
Yeah.
I also think it's I read it less of a don't call us, we'll call you, as a more like the door will be opened for you, for he who is prepared, for they who are prepared at the time that it will happen.
Seek and ye shall find, knock and
Absolutely.
Door will be opened. To bring it back to the text also, it kind of brings it all full circle back to Father CR's journey to Damkar again, and being approached by these masters of wisdom who already knew who he was. You know, when we are ready, our spiritual teacher will appear to us. And whether that happens while you're sitting in meditation or in a lodge, that's always something that we should be able to tune into. And at some point, for I think everybody, we have the capacity to connect with. Of course, in any sort of holistic reality where we're looking at as above, so below, finding that spiritual teacher within ourselves oftentimes comes at a point where we do end up finding a spiritual teacher in our material world, or finding the place where we most belong. The Fama gets into the alchemical path of those who are looking for gold and that material essence of everything. And I think too that alludes to this sort of the door will be opened, or don't call us, we'll call you. The people who are actually there for the right reasons and who have purified themselves to align themselves with the divine truth are tuning into the Godhead the same way as all of their fellow brethren are. And that at that point, that goodness will present itself to you, because you are the goodness presenting yourself to it. Again, today we were reading from the Rosicrucian Trilogy, the Fama Fraternitatis translation by Jocelyn Goodwin, Christopher McIntosh, and Donata McIntosh. This selection was made by illustrious Clifford Jacobs. Thank you again, Michael. Michael, it was our pleasure to have you here today in the reading room.
Thank you for putting this all together and making this happen, Jason.
Of course.
and for the crew.
Yeah, and the crew. Thank you guys. Blessings be to all. All right. Well, what did you think?
Well, it was a great experience. It was a great process and a great journey. And for me, I'm always about the journey. And, you know, for the viewers, if you have a chance to watch this, that's great, be a part of that process. Or if you are ever invited to speak on a subject, do that as well, because that's part of the journey too. And I loved Mike and you, of course. And it was, you know, a great experience, but one that perhaps we should try to do more often. And I hope that brothers who are coming into the craft really do get a chance to see this and other things. I know that our Grand Master is really supportive of, well, as we say, the more esoteric aspects of Masonry, even though, as you pointed out earlier, Masonry is esoteric because it separates us from the profane world.
Yeah.
But no, it was totally enjoyable, and I hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. I had a wonderful time as well. Speaking of our Grand Master, let's let him take us out.
My brother, we are each on our own journey. That doesn't change with the color of our aprons, the initials that precede our name, or the numbers that follow. Yet too often, too much of our Masonic experience is consumed by the mundane yet necessary work of attending to the business of our lodges. While the social and charitable aspects of our craft are cherished parts of our tradition, they too can command an inordinate share of our time and efforts. But what of improving ourselves as men and Masons? There is an undeniable thirst in modern Freemasonry for the esoteric knowledge entrusted to the care of well-informed brethren. For as long as the craft has existed, brethren have gathered together within lodges and without to exchange, share, offer Masonic insights, thoughts, and ideas. So I congratulate you, my brother, for your inquisitive mind, and thank you for joining us for Craftsmen Online's Reading Room,